Hello everyone, today is April 26th, and on this day in 1865, John Wilkes Booth is hunted down and killed by the Federal Cavalry at a Virginia farm some 12 days after he had assassinated President Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater. He had been one of the most famous actors in America, so a lot of people in the audience that day recognized him, and the Army was fast on his trail. He took off toward southern Maryland and spent a couple of days at the home of a Confederate agent before taking a boat across the Potomac to Virginia. A few days later, he was hiding in the barn of another farm when he was discovered by Union soldiers. The barn was set ablaze to flush him out, but he was shot while still inside. He lived for another 3 hours before gazing in his hands and muttering, "Useless, useless," as he died. In 1954, the Geneva Conference begins with representatives from the U.S., the Soviet Union, China, France, and Great Britain coming together to resolve several key problems in Asia, including the war between the French and Vietnamese nationalists in Indochina. Discussions on Vietnam started off just as France suffered its worst military defeat of the war, and they eventually signed an agreement that the French would withdraw their troops from the north, and Vietnam would temporarily be divided at the 17th parallel, pending elections within 2 years to pick a president and reunite the country. Knowing that Ho Chi Minh's communists would likely win any such election, the U.S. quickly helped install an anti-communist regime in South Vietnam and began giving it financial and military assistance. These turned out to be the initial steps towards the eventual U.S. war in Vietnam. In 1977, crowds began to wait in line and hope for a chance to enter what would quickly become the most famous nightclub in the world. Studio 54 opened its doors for the very first time. Steve Rubell and Ian Schrager created the club, which became famous for shamelessly excluding everyday people and only allowing the most famous or beautiful to pass the velvet rope, where drugs and disco ruled the night. On any given night, you are likely to see famous faces partying down. People like Andy Warhol, Mick Jagger, Liza Minnelli, Elizabeth Taylor, Elton John, Frank Sinatra, Jack Nicholson. The list literally goes on and on. The club enjoyed an epic run from this day in 1977 until February 1980, when they hosted the end of modern-day Gomorrah party. And 30 years plus since it closed its doors, it's still the most widely known nightclub in the world. And in 1986, the world's worst nuclear disaster ever occurred at Chernobyl in the Ukraine. 31 people immediately died in the incident, and thousands more were exposed to radioactive material. Soviet workers at the plant were bumbling through some experiments and made numerous errors in judgment before an explosion ripped through the reactor, shooting more than 50 tons of radioactive material into the atmosphere. The Soviets only admitted to the incident after Swedish authorities had discovered a large radioactive cloud spreading across northern Europe. An estimated 5,000 Soviet citizens eventually died from cancer and other radiation-related illnesses, and millions more may have had their health adversely affected in some way. Well, that's it for today, but be sure to come back tomorrow for more on this day in history.